Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about the new MacBook Pro, which I've been using for a few months now, and I really like it. Starting with the design, this computer looks great. I think it's my favorite MacBook yet, and it feels solid. There's just something about it that makes it feel a little more robust than the old design. Despite them actually being the same thickness, now it just comes all the way up to the edges rather than tapering off to make it appear thinner than it was. Although the taper was pretty convenient to just easily pick it up off the table, but for me personally, I find that the boxier design is a little bit harder to grab. Also, with the added thickness, you get some added ports. So on the left, you have MagSafe, 2 Thunderbolt ports, and a high impedance headphone jack. If you asked me before I got this, I would have told you how excited I was to have MagSafe back, but I've only really used it a handful of times. It usually lives in my bag as the to-go charger so I can top off quickly when I'm out, but spoiler alert, I haven't found myself needing to do that very often. And on the right side, you have HDMI, another Thunderbolt, and an SD card reader. Personally, I don't use HDMI all that often, but the SD card reader, on the other hand, almost daily. It's just so convenient to be able to just take media from my camera and put it right in my laptop without looking for a dongle or some adapter or going to my Thunderbolt dock. Getting rid of even just that one step just really helps streamline the whole process of making things. But it isn't without its issues. Yes, I can now plug the SD card straight into the computer, but every time I plug it in, I feel like I have to unplug it and then plug it back in for it to actually get picked up. I don't know if this is an issue with the SD card slot specifically or with Mac OS and SD cards, since I've had this happen before with adapters. Moving to the inside, you have the Trackpad, which compared to the 16-inch MacBook Pro seems a little constrained, but it's just as good and still one of the best trackpads I've used in a computer. And above that, you have the new keyboard without a touch bar, which I do miss. I mean, yes, it is convenient to have dedicated buttons for volume and brightness, but I never use the rest of them. Personally, I like to use Automator to set up custom buttons and shortcuts on the touch bar, but let me know down in the comments if you did anything cool like that or if you just hated it. I do like the new Touch ID button though. Something about it being like an actual key with a fingerprint sensor in the middle of it makes it feel a little bit more integrated to the rest of the keyboard as opposed to how it was before. And I really like the aesthetics of having a black keyboard with the black anodizing behind it. It might not have an actual purpose aside from looking cool, but I enjoy having it. Moving up to the screen, this is by far one of, if not the best displays that I've ever used, and it's pretty much ruined most other monitors for me. And yeah, there's a notch, but I don't find it too invasive. Since the screen's actually a little bit taller to get that 14.2 inches, you don't have less usable space. You honestly might even have a little bit more, since you now don't have the menu bar in the usable area, if that makes sense. It's now above that in the new added screen that has the notch in it. It does bug me a bit that the bottom of the menu bar isn't flush with the bottom of the notch. I don't see any reason why this couldn't be changed in software. I mean, I'm sure the icons don't need that much padding around them, maybe just shrink that gap and that way everything's in line. But moving on to the best part of this computer, the performance. Now this is the M1 Pro model with 10 CPU cores, 16 GPU cores, and 16 gig of RAM. So it's that one right above the base model 14-inch. And it's been able to handle pretty much everything I've put at it. In Final Cut Pro, C-Log plays back pretty smooth even with a few layers of it. It only really starts to slow down once I put on a LUT with some color correction and graphics, but even then, if I just let it render after I make a change, it plays back fine. Sometimes it's a little jittery depending on how much I have going on the timeline, but it's usable. And export times are really quick. For YouTube, I usually use the Apple device's 4K preset since it processes the fastest. And it exports in pretty much real time. Usually in the past, I would just start an export and go do something else. But with M1 Pro, I find myself just starting the thumbnail or writing the description, so I'm ready to upload everything. Considering this is Apple's own software running on their own hardware, running on their own silicon, I'm not really surprised at all by this. I fully expected Final Cut Pro to run faster on this computer than it did on the Intel Macs. But on the other hand, I do also use Fusion 360 quite a bit, and it's still not optimized for Apple Silicon. It's just running in Rosetta. And aside from the usual weird stuff that Fusion just does in general, it runs really well. And the modeling environment felt snappy if I either had a fresh file or I was working on a more complex project. Also, renders came out pretty quick compared to the Intel MacBook, and there wasn't the sound of a jet engine going off. And speaking of fan noise, like, I never hear anything from this laptop. It's pretty much dead silent 99% of the time. There were a couple of times where I heard the fan spin up, but they were so quiet that if I wasn't listening for them, I would have missed them. For such a portable computer, it has some wild performance. I do feel like I'm hitting a ceiling with the RAM though. I wish I'd gone for 32 gig. I was just kind of impatient and wanted the computer faster. But regardless, whether I'm at my desk docked and plugged into power or outside working off the battery, this computer can take anything. And while it is on battery, this computer is incredibly efficient, which I'm sure is definitely a direct result of switching to Apple Silicon. Like I mentioned in my 13 Pro video, the control over hardware and software lets them optimize and integrate everything they can to get the most performance, but using as little power as possible. And with a relatively low workload like web browsing, writing videos, or just editing some photos, I could probably go pretty much almost 2 days without plugging it in. But doing some more intensive tasks like video editing or CAD, it'll go at least a day. I usually just plug in around 20 to 30% out of habit. And even then, if you're using MagSafe, it'll go from 0 to 50% in just about 30 minutes. So you have a really long time you can go without the charger, with very short periods on the charger. Overall, this is a fantastic computer. Scary fast performance, incredibly impressive battery life, and a really good industrial design. It's pretty much the computer I've always wanted. You have all this power and all this like time to use that power wrapped up in a great package. But thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe down below for more videos about tech, cameras, and making. Here's my video on the iPhone 13 Pro, and here's a video that YouTube thinks you're gonna like the best.